I'm here talking with Grammy-nominated composer Ryan Shore, who was nominated this year for The Shrine, an independent horror thriller. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat, Ryan.
Thank you.
So, how did you get your start in music, and what made you want to become a film composer?
Well, I started when I was about 11, and I took up the saxophone very probably for reasons why an 11-year-old would be interested in music. I uh, I I like the saxophonist in the Muppets. I um, I thought it looked cool. I was sort of aware of music through my uncle, Howard Shore, who was a and still is a huge influence
Of
on my
course, yes.
career. He played the saxophone, and because of his involvement with Saturday Night Live, I was aware of the Blues Brothers, and I liked Lou Marini. This Blue Lou, the saxophonist in the Blues Brothers.
Yes.
So all that stuff, just I thought it was cool, and so I took up the saxophone, and then I shortly thereafter started taking up other instruments like clarinet and flute and piano. I really started getting into it much more when I was in high school, playing in like all the bands that I could get into, jazz band, concert band, marching band, all that stuff. And then when I was graduating from high school, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do music full time. I had never dedicated all of my time to it. Like I was really into academics as well,
Hmm.
and um, and during my summers in high school, I did a lot of summer music programs like Eastman School of Music and Interlochen and Berklee College of Music for their summer program. And Berkeley gave me a scholarship to come back to the college and study full time, and that sort of made my decision much easier. And they were incredible. They gave me a full scholarship for 4 years,
Wow.
um, and I started really studying it and really really getting into it at that point.
And were you watching films as a kid? Were you surrounded by TV and media, and did that always have an appeal to you, or were you always more into kind of the performance aspect?
I was always way more into the performance aspect. I think that for the first 10 years from starting music, so like age 11 through the end of college,
Hmm.
it was like nonstop playing. Just playing the instruments. I did very minimal writing, even though I majored in film composing. I think most of my friends who knew me back at Berkeley knew me as an instrumentalist.
Hmm.
And to be honest, I wasn't really that into movies when I was growing up. Um, like I tended to rent the same movies over and over again. Movies like Airplane and Trading Places, and yeah, I don't know, just like I found it very comforting. Just you know, but I started getting into it more when I was in college and studying it, and I really sort of like got into movies sort of through the eyes of film composing.
Yeah.
Being introduced to great scores, great composers, that tuned me or turned me on to like watching, classic movies.
Hmm. And and I guess like moving guys to your work right now, about the Shrine. I'm so glad that a score like that got nominated. So congratulations on your Grammy nomination.
Thank you.
It speaks volumes to what you're able to accomplish. I think many horror scores these days follow a very, at least to me, boring formulaic arcs that are very predictable. But with what you did with the Shrine, you had some very intricate textures and atmospheres that kind of really slowly work their way under my skin. What is the goal of music in a horror film, specifically your music?
Great question. You know, I think that my goal of music, regardless of the genre, is always just to support the film, to help tell the story, underscore the arc of the film, and um, that's always my goal. Like whatever kind of movie it is,
Hmm.
and whenever it comes to a specific genre, um, to be honest, I mean, I'm certainly aware of the genres, of course, as we all are, but
Right.
but I tend not to think about it so much. Like I tend not to think about, well, what's been done in this genre before, or what's a cliched way of doing, or not cliche, or even not cliched way of doing it.
Hmm.
And I tend not to think so much about that, and I tend to just think about whatever this story is, and just try and get into that, and find a way to help tell that story with what I do, which is music.
So is it so for like the shrine? Are those your reactions too? Are you to the story, to the characters? Are you trying to kind of go into it and kind of build layers underneath it to try to push stuff up forward? Or I mean, what are you trying to do with the music in terms of a thriller? You know, you're trying to do something, get the audience to react. So what are you trying to do with the music there?
Well, specifically, I'm trying to get the audience to feel.
Hmm.
And with a movie like The Shrine, it's a very serious thriller, drama. It's dark. It has cult like solemn undercurrents in it, and the film is really plays as like a slow burn. Like as you mentioned, that sort of gets underneath you in a subconscious way.
Right.
And I was very aware of that, while I was scoring it, that musical ideas, I could take my time in developing them. Very very much like it mirrors the way the characters are slowly deepening and intertwining themselves irreversibly into the small town that they're exploring.
Hmm.
So musically, like I'm always trying, at least in this movie, I'm never trying to like be too heavy-handed. I want it to feel organic. I don't want it to. I didn't want it to feel manipulative in any way.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And you were explaining what music should do in a film. What do you think a score, whether it be a horror score or not, should not be doing?
Well, I think it shouldn't take you out of the movie.
Hmm.
I think that if a score becomes too manipulative, um, either consciously or subconsciously, I think the audience can start to feel that it just feels a little disingenuous.
Hmm.
And maybe an audience member wouldn't be able to put it in words, or to say like, well, that was the score because they were just doing that guitar thing that I've heard 12,000 times. They wouldn't be able to say that, but I think that it would probably appear, in their comments in ways like, well, that felt cheesy, or I wasn't scared, or stuff like that, of how they would sort of react to it as a human.
Hmm. And movies like The Shrine and independent features and independent horror films, a lot they're coming out a lot these days. There are many composers out there probably working under a strict budget, working under constraints, and I can't imagine Shrine's budget was enormous. But however, you managed to create a soundscape that was so rich and full. What are the tips? What are tips to working around budget constraints?
Well, you're right. The budget on this one was not very large, and honestly, that was one of the things that I was so pleasantly, surprised, and
Hmm.
obviously honored, about with the Grammy nomination, is because I've had the opportunity to record scores with full orchestras, and I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm proud of that work. And on this movie, they just didn't have the budget for that. So um, on this film, I composed every note, I orchestrated it all, I performed all of it,
Wow.
and I even mixed it. I mean, like literally nobody touched this score. you know, like not even my assistant, like to do bounce downs. Like I did everything myself on this one, and it was just because that's what the budget dictated.
Wow. That's so. How long did it take you to do the score?
As much time as they'll give me. With every movie, it's always the same.
Well,
But
how much do you spend? How much do you take for the Shrine?
I don't know. I think on this one it may have been about 5 weeks.
That,
Something like that.
that's pretty good. I mean, usually I hear some nightmare stories where composers have 2 weeks to do something, so at least you had time.
I know. I've done those too, and they're total stream of conscious.
Yeah, it's just pouring out.
Yeah, it's just you don't second guess anything. You just do it.
If you had a bigger budget or an unlimited budget, would you have scored the Shrine differently?
You know, I always try to find an approach for each project that, regardless of the budget, that you'd find this way of doing it that even if you could go back and somebody wanted to put $5 million into the recording of the music, that you still would have done it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I take that as a great challenge every time, because I never want the music to sound like it's coming up short. I don't want it to sound like, well, we tried, but it's obvious we didn't have the resources. Like, I hate that.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't have changed very much. Compositionally, I wouldn't have changed anything. And the instruments that I wrote for, I wouldn't have changed any of that. I think that what I would have done is just the instruments that are acoustic in nature,
Mm-hmm.
I would have recorded those live. And that's about it. I would have recorded the orchestra live. I would have recorded the choir live. And I would have hired my engineer to mix it.
Give you a little break from.
Yeah.
I also want to touch on a little bit older film you did, Stan Helsing, because as dumb as spoofs can be, I find them hilarious. And I grew up on Hot Shots and Airplane and The Naked Gun, so if done right, they have me rolling on the ground, laughing. And do you find comedy scoring, especially in that kind of genre, is that extremely difficult?
You know, First of all, I grew up on those movies too. And like to have scored a movie that had Leslie Nielsen in it was,
Yeah.
it's just a thrill for me. It's like I grew up watching him.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a chance to meet him, through the press stuff that we did, and so that was a real thrill. I've listened to a lot of other, and I've talked with a lot of other composers. I've listened to a lot of other composers' interviews, and I know that everybody says that comedy is the hardest thing to score.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to disagree. I find it as challenging as any other, to get it right, or to hopefully get it right. And I know where the challenges are in comedy. I mean, it all has to do with timing and tone.
Right.
But then again, other genres have those same challenges too. So I don't know. I mean, when I think back on writing the score for that movie, which was a blast to do, I'm not sure if I found it any more challenging than any other genre just because it was comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you what I loved about it, was that for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, it's one of the spoofs and all these classic characters from these iconic horror movies are in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a chance to sort of tip my hat to those scores when those characters would come up. And so that's just fun to do that.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of those scores they always play on more iconic scores. So did you have to do a lot of fun research, I guess, listening to all those scores again?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You go back and check out those scores, and you try and distill as best you can what it is about that score that might be its signature or stand out. One of my favorite composers, among so many, but is Alf Clausen, who scores The Simpsons.
Of course, yeah.
And I'm sure we've all listened to his interviews, and he talks about that so much, where they do all of those homages to different things, and you try and distill something from it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a movie like Stan Helsing, even though it's a feature-length film, and these characters are in it the whole way through, when it really comes down to it, you don't have that much time to comment musically on the. It's like a character comes up, maybe you've got 2 or 3 cues, maybe each cue is a couple of minutes long. So even though it's a feature, you still only have like 3 minutes to say something about that homage. It's not like you've got forever.
Right.
So it's fun.
So going back to your Grammy nomination, I want you to take me through the moment from when you heard the news, and what was your reaction and your feeling, because it's got to be pretty freaking awesome from what I can imagine.
um, well, you hear about these stories where, oh, I was sunning myself in the Caribbean when my agent called and woke me up at 5 in the morning. It was nothing like that. Um, I knew when the nominations were coming out. I had a few submissions in contention this year. I was curious, when the nominations came out, to check it out, and I went on the Grammy website myself and read it, um, and then I reread it. And then I searched the page with my name to make sure that would actually come up as the right match again. Like double checking it. Through computers. Yeah, it was a total thrill. I mean, I was sort of in shock, and honestly, I mean, like it just looked to me like I photoshopped that myself. You know.
Well, it's well deserved, and it's rooting for you. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And I guess to wrap things up, I always like to ask composers if you had the chance to score any film ever made with no disrespect to the original composer, what film would you choose?
Well, that's hard. Because so many of the films that would come to mind were ones where they were scored so unbelievably well.
What playground would you like to play in to just take a crack at?
Oh, hmm. I just don't know if I would do a better job. You know what I mean. It's like you listen to some of these classic scores, and it's just so incredible. So with no disrespect and certainly no allusion to being able to better it in any way at all, but just strictly from an inspiring type of movie that I love, and again, partly because I love it is because the score is so brilliant. So, but just for the fun of being a part of something like that, one of my favorite movies of all time is Back to the Future.
Oh wow, that's a good choice.
So, Alan Silvestri is brilliant and wrote such a brilliant score. So, and it's pitch perfect, no pun intended. But wow, what an inspiring movie, to be a part of that just works on every level.
He's great. He also makes really good wine. If you've tried his wine, it's quite fantastic too.
I have a bottle in my collection.
Well, Ryan, I'm out of questions for you, but thank you so much for taking the time. It's a real pleasure, real honor.
Likewise, thank you so much for asking me to do it.